Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from today. And thank you for joining this Tech Strong learning experience with Harness. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. It will be available afterward on demand. We're also going to send you a link to the recording once we conclude. We do have some resources in the handout section. Go ahead and click that area. We want to make sure that you've got everything that you need for this session. We've also got a survey in there for you. Fill that out throughout the presentation. I'm also going to ask you at the end to fill that out if you don't mind. We've got a Q&A section on the right side of your screen. Any questions that you've got, make sure that you put those in the Q&A area. Any questions that we're not able to get to today, we want to make sure that those are in there so we can reach out to you once the program is over. We've also got the chat section on the right side of your screen. Make sure that you are sharing your experiences with us, your comments, your understanding on the matter, anything that you want to hear from us, and let us know where you're tuning in from today and why you're tuning in with us. We want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. So make sure you're using the chat. Let's go ahead and kick off today's topic. We've got the Unified Pipeline Database and App CI/CD. We're joined with Eric Minnick, Director of DevOps Solutions at Harness, and Matt Schillerstrom, Director of Product Management at Harness. Eric, Matt, thank you for joining us today. Let's go ahead and take it away from here.
All right, well, thanks for that introduction, and let's get started with the presentation. So first off, who are these guys? Me first. My name is Matt Schillerstrom, the Director of Product at Harness. Been here 3 years, working on a variety of solutions, but one of my favorite is continuous delivery and databases. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today. But I'll let Eric introduce himself next.
Thanks, Matt. Eric Minnick, in the DevOps space for quite a while. I love continuous delivery, and I love how it's spread into all the different sorts of things. We do it for applications, for databases, for infrastructure, for machine learning algorithms. And so seeing how we do it for everything is a lot of fun. And I'm really excited to talk about how applications and databases work together and how we deliver them in a coordinated fashion. So really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. And yeah, we work at Harness, which is an AI native software delivery platform. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about that later during the demo. But I think you'll be excited to see what you learn about a unified pipeline today. So the quick plan, we'll go over what modern continuous delivery is and isn't, perhaps. Databases matter to CD. Like, why do databases matter to continuous delivery? What is database DevOps? How database DevOps can help? And I have a demo that will go over the unified pipeline experience and have a little bit of Q&A. All right, Eric, I will turn it over to you.
All right. So modern continuous delivery, like emphasis on modern, what's going on with that? And, the book on continuous delivery, the kind of seminal work by Humble and Farley, it's like 15 years old now. That came out in 2010, and it's not 2010 anymore. And, it's certainly not 2004 when, some of the early CI tools started trying to do deployments too. Certainly not when Jenkins came out. So we know how to do continuous delivery at this point, but, the tools that we used 15 years ago, 20 years ago, are probably not cutting edge anymore. It's time to, really think about like the right way to do this and make sure that we're doing it in modern ways, right? So we want to think about what to do. So we want to make sure that as we're delivering, we're able to go quickly and safely, that it's a confident way of doing things, and that our governance models are not too heavy-handed. They work for developers, but there is governance, that we're not just like a free-for-all and it's like, oh, ship total junk and we'll hope that it works. It shouldn't be just a YOLO situation. And, we need configuration that scales. I think a lot of us have worked in situations where we've had pipeline sprawl, and anytime we needed to implement something new, we had to go edit dozens or hundreds of pipelines, and it wasn't any fun. So we've been burned by bad CI/CD in the past, many of us, and we've learned what doesn't work. And so let's go tackle the right way to do it. So we're going to spend a few minutes on what we need. So let's dive into that, Matt. Let's go on to the next one. So obviously we need pipelines, and those pipelines should be powerful. We now know that our pipelines should be configured as code, right? That's pretty straightforward. Probably YAML. I know you can write it as a Groovy script. You probably should not write it as a Groovy script, but a declarative model. I like declarative. You like declarative approaches, Matt?
Yeah. Declarative is for the win.
Yeah, declarative is good. At the same time, being able to at least get a representation of your code in a visual fashion is really good to be able to understand what you have. Being able to edit it in a visual editor is even more powerful. So getting that visual approach is really, really nice. And then you want the advanced things to be easy, right? You can script out fancy deployment styles. You could script out a blue-green deployment or canary deployment. You can script out how you cascade something across multiple clusters, multiple clouds, things like that. The more of that is baked into your tooling, the better, right? The less you need to create and the more is there for you automatically, the better. So when we're thinking about our tooling, you want to look at how much the pipeline does for me. Okay. That's nice. And then as fast as we want to go, there's almost always some time you need to do something manual for some of your applications. And so you want some way of being able to bounce out and bring in a manual step. Do I need an approval? Do I need a check of some sort where I need a person to go do something? Look at how manual processes can interact with our pipelines, right? And how natural that is. So those are the sorts of things that I look at with my pipelines. Go on to the next thing that we need in our recipe. All right. Safe releases help us be confident, right? Confidence in our releases help us move quickly. It's one of those things where we can release more if it's safer, right? Speed and quality are not contrasting factors. Quality gives us more speed. So one of the things that I always look for is a release safety net. And so we want a data-driven rollback decision. So whenever we're deploying, especially to production, we want to tap into the observability, tap into the logging. So if there's an indication that our latest release is going sideways, should be able to detect that automatically and trigger a rollback, or at least trigger an alert to a person who can look at that too and say, yeah, this doesn't look right. Let's do a rollback. And that rollback should be a fully automated process, just like our deployment was. It shouldn't be like handcrafted artisanal beard oil, right? This doesn't need to be created at the time, right? It should be fully automated, part of the process. And then to minimize all these risks, I like progressive delivery, right? Let's make sure that when we're doing deployment, we're doing this in the smallest possible way, right? And that can be done in like a canary deployment where if I'm deploying something that's running on 10 nodes, I'd start by deploying to 1 or 2 nodes and I put a fraction of my traffic on it. Or you could even do this with feature flags and experiment on it. Only turn on a handful of the traffic to a new feature, right? So whether we're talking about new versions of software or new features, exposing only some of our users to that at a time and learning whether that makes our software better or worse makes it safer. So looking at ways of doing progressive delivery makes things safer and lets us make data-driven decisions about whether we're making our software better or worse and whether it should stay in production or whether it should roll back. Anything you wanted to add to that, Matt?
Honestly, the recipe that you've just described, some people in our audience might be like, you're describing my last Friday night when I had to deploy an application, look at 8 different Chrome tabs of different monitoring, and then babysit it just in case I had to roll something back. But like what you're describing is an automated way to do all of that to get my Friday night back. It's you might think this, the normal way of doing things manually. It's not normal anymore.
Yeah, no, I had a customer a few years back who described it as, we used to stay in the office late to run our deployments and stare at the screens and make sure everything went well. Now, if we need to do it, I'm happy to click a couple buttons on my phone while I'm on the train because I'm not worried about it and it's fine. If something does go wrong, it'll just roll back. No big deal. I bring up, this is 10, 15, 20 years old. And some of these techniques are that old, right? We look at doing a canary deployment, monitoring the release, automatically rolling back if it's not working. We look at Timothy Fitz's blog of doing the impossible 50 times a day. That was 2009, I think, right? Where they're talking about canary deployments and automatically rolling them back. These approaches have been known for a long time. They've been proven for a long time, but they're still not always widely adopted by everybody. But now you don't have to build the tools yourself. It's widely available in commercial tools to go use it. But if you're using Jenkins, you're probably building it yourself. Let's keep going. All right. Governance developers love. One of my most controversial line titles, I think. But I think this is the challenge that I lay down to any sort of a platform team is how do you put together the sort of governance that keeps developers in a good place without really making everybody angry? And that would be setting up policies that are nicely automated, but don't get in everybody's way. So you want to let developers edit things, but if they edit things like deleting an approval that you require, they delete the security scans that you require, it says, no, you can't make that change. I'm not going to accept, I'm going to auto reject that pull request on the pipeline. You want to put in those sorts of rules. If there are people who shouldn't be able to change things, you need fine-grained access control on that. You need really good auditing and logging. So if something changed and it's broken, you know who changed it, right? If you've got that sort of governance in place, then it's easier to trust the right people to make the changes. You don't have to lock it down to just a handful of people. Really key. So that gets us to the kind of the last piece, which I think really sums this up on the next slide, Matt, which is scaling this. And in summary, you want to make it easy for the teams to do things the right way and difficult for them to do it wrong. So I love templates, right? I was talking with one of our customers and they're talking about standardization will set you free, right? And so have a really nice template so that you can reuse ideal configuration. And if you need to change something, you update your template and all of your teams get that updated template. And that way, if I'm a developer, the easiest way for me to spin up a new service is I go into my developer portal. I say, oh, I'm another one of these. I click a couple buttons, put in a couple pieces of information about what makes my service special. And I've got it and I'm up and running and it's super fast and super easy. But for the people who care about, are the security scans there and are all of these things done right, the template has all of those requirements there and it's all set up right automatically. So it's super easy for the developer and everything's done in the standard way. So the right way is the easy way. And I've made that so normal. And then I keep things in line with that policy as code so that they can change things if they need to, but within those guardrails, so within those bounds. So that kind of sets up, I think, that core continuous delivery that we want to set up, but it doesn't quite answer the, like, what about the database question? And Matt, I think the database is super duper important here, right?
Yeah. Databases maybe is at the end of this golden path that you have on your picture. That we
on the left though, right?
The one on the left, yeah. The one that we kind of forget about, and we're trying to just hand over the next bit of change to the new feature to the database team. And the story that you just told, though, Eric, like when I worked at Target, we had this thing called guidance over governance because developers didn't love governance. But I honestly feel like developers do love governance if you give them a paved path, maybe not like a golden path because that's structured and rigid, but like this paved path with flexibility. And that's what they want. Just like what you said, like give me a template that's going to make me do the right thing, allow me to have some flexibility, but I don't want to do the wrong thing. And governance helps me get there. And I think with databases, right, that's databases and changing data, losing data, dropping tables, like that's scary. And that's what we're trying to do here. So what I'll be like walking you through quickly before I get to a demo of this unified pipeline with database changes in a CD pipeline. We're going to just talk through the process and value of why databases matter, and then again look at this in action. And when we talk about database DevOps, we're really thinking and talking about bringing the same DevOps principles we use for applications, everything that Eric talked about for speed, safety, automation, to the database world, which has traditionally lagged behind, right? Database changes slow everything down. I mean, who can relate to that? If I could see everybody raise their hands, which I can't, I'm sure everybody's there. Thank you, Eric, for entertaining me. But yeah, for most companies today, like application deployments are modern and automated, just as we just talked about. You build, version, test, deploy all through your CI/CD pipeline, but then databases, not so much, right? Like databases for one customer that I've talked to looked like Eric sending me over an email with some SQL statements and changes and expectations, or maybe even a spreadsheet, and then saying, hey, can you get this done in the next week? I want to deliver this new feature on this date, right? Like that's slow, right? If you're dealing with people, email, spreadsheets, and back and forth interactions, that's what database changes often look like today, right? So many customers and people that we talk to still emailing scripts, and it works, but there's a better way, right? And the principles behind this, is we talk about everything as code, so why not database schema changes too, right? Like we love simplified declarative approaches. Why can't we do this for the whole life cycle of the software we're delivering? We often like to say, if we think about like the Happy Gilmore movie, right? Database changes live in Git. That's your home, right? Like it doesn't have to live in an email or your sent items or a spreadsheet to look at historical versions of the database changes you need associated with your application and everything. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the challenges just to kind of level set everybody on what we're talking about. So why do database deployments matter for apps? Not every new feature requires a database change or schema change, right? But let's just say I have a simple login UI application like this, where I have a username and password, but where does it get stored, right? And like that lives on a database, right? So you have your front end app and your database that's storing all that. But then what if you need to add another parameter to the login or another attribute that you're going to use further into the application, right? Like that's going to require like a schema change, right? To be associated with your new feature, right? So a new field, maybe you're inserting a column that's capturing like a zip code or something. But that's the schema change, that we're waiting for the DBA, the database administrator, to make. And not in one environment. Usually there's even more than 3 environments, right? Some companies have 10 different data environments across the whole globe based upon different data requirements. So databases, matter for apps so that the apps can work and give that customer experience such that when somebody logs in, we know who they are and what their last interaction was and what their next thing is going to be. All right. So database changes today slow down application delivery, right? And increases risk. So let's talk through some of these silos of information. So first off, like manual database changes. So like I was saying before, devs have to wait for the DBA, the people that have the knowledge, right, and the experience to make that schema change to production, as well as all the other environments that support that for testing. And oftentimes, like these manual database changes, like when there's an issue that happens, it's hard to really understand like what really hurt the performance, right? Was it the database change or was it something buried in the new feature rollout that's tied to your Java app on your JVM? So it's hard, right? So then ultimately that slows down the application release. So when Eric was talking earlier about progressive delivery with new features that you're rolling out, incorporating database changes to that becomes even another layer of risk, right? The other issue with database changes today too is just the lack of visibility. There's a single pane of glass that people look at. And oftentimes that glass for database changes is somebody emailing you that it's done or some script in a command line that people are seeing, but it's really hard to see the visibility and control as things are progressing through environments, right? So what that often looks like, and Eric, maybe you've experienced this in the past, is you're rolling out a new feature, there's this database schema change that you're rolling out to different environments, and all of a sudden the environment drifts. So you get a call from your customer or maybe your beta customer that says, well, I was going to use this new feature, but this is what it currently looks like. What's happening, right? I'm getting an error. And you're like, people in Minnesota, it's working, but people over in Europe, it's not working. What happened? And your DBA then goes back and is like, oh, looks like it didn't update over in this geographic region, but I didn't catch it because I was having to find it manually. So then you have a different experience.
Yeah, especially if you're hand migrating changes or you're hand optimizing things. Yeah, then every database has its own special variants. And you've made changes in prod and you had to remember to migrate them back down through the lower environments. Oh, it's so hard to get that right. So yeah, the drift is such a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And with that, besides drift, like just the manual review of everything with your change. So now you're taking maybe a brand new developer who's crafted some SQL statements, and there's better tools to do this today, for helping you out helping you learn SQL, right? But you're taking probably a non-expert developer in SQL, handing that over to a DBA who then has to like review it because there's a lack of trust, lack of knowledge, maybe make some edits. Maybe the DBA is coaching the developer on like how that SQL statement needs to change. And then, running it, right? And this DBA is doing this for every developer that they're working with, not just you. So you have to remember the toil there, right? But ultimately that leads to risk because when you're doing any type of manual review, especially when it comes to like testing the data changes, you're introducing risk, and it's easy to miss that checklist that is naturally in your head. There's many things I do today where I don't follow like a printed out checklist because I've done it so much, but something can easily distract me from following that. So visually, what does this look like too? But database changes, create problems incrementally as you work through the software delivery lifecycle, right? So we see the silos across application teams and DBA silos. Eric, like I said before, talked about progressive delivery, but buried underneath that definition is like, how do you get teams to collaborate and work together to be that progressive delivery? Because it's not just the buttons you press, it's the people that you work with. Also, like I had mentioned before, we see manually applied SQL scripts that are just going through not only one environment, multiple environments, like I mentioned before. These slowdowns and changes for database ultimately end up with production outages that you see because different environments have different rules and requirements. Rollback paths are interesting because usually there's a non-existent rollback path half the time. Maybe the plan is, well, my rollback plan for this database schema change is to restore from backup. And that should not be your plan. That should not be your rollback plan to restore from a virtual tape or a tape, right, Eric? So
no, I'm just looking at this and I'm like, well, it's slow, but at least it's dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous is fun. So I like being on call and responding, but I don't have to do all that. So all this place, we're seeing people, write and test SQL manually, using spreadsheets or emails to implement the changes, right? The DBA is reviewing these SQL statements to make sure it's done correctly, and then manually running it on each DB instance within each environment. So lots of toil that we're all used to and don't complain about, maybe in front of other people, but it's okay to complain because that's not the normal way of doing things these days. So let's talk a little bit about database DevOps, and we'll run into the demo shortly. All right. So with database DevOps, right, we're integrating database changes into your pipeline and gaining that database transparency across environments, right? Like who wants to see as a developer how my data is across every environment so that I can see that the change works so that I can release that feature, right? Or at least know where it's at in the process. And that's where what we're talking about today is like the concept of orchestrating database changes. So treating database code just like the application code, just like when you're pushing a new app feature from your favorite code repository to different environments, the developer knows where it is and the test that it's running. So we want to treat database code just the same, right? And we want to define database promotion rules so that when these tests pass in lower environments, like that it can get promoted to higher environments, the same way that you promote code into production for your application. And then ultimately, this themes into just GitOps for databases with that declarative approach, just so developers can check in code into their repo and know that it's going to follow a simple process to get it to change out without having to babysit it. Secondly, visibility, easily comparing between environments because not every rollout to each environment goes as planned. So you can have holistically a view of each change set applied to each environment to understand the state that it's in. Lastly, when we think about database DevOps, we're looking at governance, right? Enforcing policies on those allowed database changes. The worst thing you could do as a developer is maybe dropping a table, but the DBA can put in a policy that restricts people from accidentally using that statement to drop a table, right? So now they can be, like the developer can be self-enabled to push out changes, but the DBA can also know that they're not going to like accidentally drop a table because we can block that. If the DBA wants to still review and approve schema changes, you can absolutely do that too, right? This database DevOps doesn't just change it. Like you can put in your normal work processes. So if you need a human in the loop to review and approve, you can do that as well, which is great. And what I also love talking about too is RBAC, and just that you can have role-based access control across each action you take with database DevOps as well. just so the DBA and developer can define their swim lanes of what they're doing. And lastly, one of our customers, Athena Health, talks about how like Harness with our database DevOps module gave them the out-of-the-box governance and change automation that couldn't compare to Liquid-based Pro's offering, and it saved them months of work with better visibility and control. A lot of these platform engineering teams that are creating database solutions they think they can build something, could build it, but what they're finding is they can buy it out of the box and then work on better, more developer-focused improvements as well. All right. So ultimately, like, what does this visually look like on how database DevOps helps? So here, right? So you put stuff, in your source control, right, in Git. You declare like the order of your changes with different tests that you need to run automatically. And these aren't tests that you have to like think of randomly when you're pushing this change out. You can utilize existing tests that are kind of pre-approved by your DBA that you've collaborated with, just so you have that consistency. Eric mentioned templates to make it easy. So we want you to do the right thing by using that. But then once you merge that change from a GitOps approach, we'll take that, we'll clone it from Git, apply SQL policies that we have, apply the changes across the environments, and then ultimately deploy the application if it passes all the tests. So you have that integrated database change that helps with the release velocity. And that's as simple as it is, taking what we've already done with CD for applications and applying it to databases, working with different personas, but applying the same DevOps concepts and principles. So we'll move into a demo where I'll just talk through the unified pipeline that we have with Harness continuous delivery and database DevOps, and some extra things in between that to make a successful application deployed. All right, so I'm just going to switch screens and move over there. All right, so let's start where developers live, inside Git. What if you could treat database changes the same way you treat application code? Here in this repo, I have a change set written in YAML. This is how we define database changes declaratively, versioned, and documented. So here you can see Harness enables version management for databases, and you can organize changes by branches like dev, QA, prod, do pull requests, and track changes just like app code. Next, let's talk about orchestration. This pipeline is how database changes are deployed across environments. It includes guardrails, approvals, validations, and governance. But before we dive into the database specifically, let's zoom out and talk through what we're looking at. So what you see here is an end-to-end pipeline from building your artifact to spinning up dev clusters, to merging into QA for testing, to getting approval, then all the way to deploying to production. And then controlling the release to your customers via feature flags and experimentation. There's no scripts to set up, just out of the box DevOps orchestration right here. I won't click into deploy to prod right now because this deployment failed due to some chaos engineering tests finding some resilience vulnerabilities. So let's go into QA to see how our database is looking. So here, let's drill into the actual process. Here's where the magic happens with databases. So if I scroll over, I can actually see where within this end-to-end pipeline, database DevOps is initializing the process, it's cloning the database for backup, and then importing the change set. And like I said, this is where Harness reads the change set files from Git, which I previously showed, parses the SQL, and tracks the version number for the database. And these tags act like checkpoints, perfect for rollback. Next, Harness also previews and validates the SQL. So here, this reduces risks from syntax issues or logic bugs. Developers get early feedback, and DBAs can gain confidence in the automation. And then once the changes are applied, Harness can actually tag the database with the version, and it enables two types of rollbacks as it's applying a schema. Is it can do it during deployment. So if something fails mid-flight, we stop and clean up, or post-deploy. If performance issues merge later, you can roll back the version. So here in this deploy to QA, I've actually adjusted the schema and applied it. Now it's going to move into a blue-green deployment alongside my application. So it's going to stage the deployment with the database schema change, as well as do some regression testing and load testing, and then some proactive chaos testing in the lower environment. And then at the end of the day, update the Jira ticket. So here you can see the end-to-end pipeline for deploying to QA, and specifically with databases. So this is in essence enabling a developer to like deploy the feature change with the database all in one pipeline without getting slowed down by any database requirements. So next, in this case too, it goes to a manual approval. So you can have Jira or ServiceNow approved and ready to deploy. And like I was mentioning before, for deploy to production, it's utilizing the same pipeline template. And in this case, doing the production rollout for the database schema change. And then here in this case, we're actually doing a canary deployment into production for a safe rollout strategy. And we had our continuous verification capability block the deployment due to some reliability vulnerabilities that were found. And then it will start the rollback process as you defined. One persona I want to pay attention to right now for database DevOps is the DBA, the database administrator. So let's look at the governance capability within policies. So this policy is defined by the database administrator, and it blocks dangerous changes like drop table or any in the environment. You can also specify different policies for environments. So if you, for some reason, want to let developers drop tables in lower environments, you can. And then in production environments, you can block them. But then with role-based access control, policies, and audit trails, you can empower self-service without sacrificing control. And this governance as code meets compliance and enables guardrails for production safely. So then I could apply this policy to every pipeline, every template, so that it's always like protecting that environment from the DBA. And you could have multiple policies running across different environments, and it's all set and configurable with templates. All right. Lastly, I wanted to showcase our database DevOps module overview. So visibility is often overlooked in database delivery. And here's our dashboard showing all your schemas, environments, and change history. So we can see all of our pull requests, and you can instantly understand what's deployed where, what's pending, and what's been rolled back. So this is a great way for your DBA to come in and see, or the developer self-service to understand that they had a change ticket and then it successfully got deployed to all these environments. And I want to point out, again, it's usually not 3 environments like dev, QA, production, but you'll see multiple database environments based upon like where your customers are and working with. So again, it gives you a great overview of everything. So to sum up the demo, like with Harness Database DevOps, you get self-service with safety application like deployments for databases, smart governance, and visibility. And at the end of the day, if you take a look at the end-to-end power of the platform, we're bringing DevOps maturity to the last mile of the delivery, which is the database. All right. So thanks for your patience as we walked through that demo, and just kind of wanted to end the presentation and webinar with who we are, as well as moving into Q&A. But again, Eric and I are from Harness. We were founded in 2017. We were recently, earned the privilege to be recognized as a leader in the Magic Quadrant for DevOps Platform from Gartner. In the 3 years that I've been here, we've dramatically grown our customers, so we're 900 plus today. And we always like to advertise, that we're creating millions and millions and millions of pipeline executions annually across a wide variety of customer base. And if the demo didn't articulate the unified pipeline, here's, one-page slide on what we offer. I'll let Eric speak to this.
Yeah, no, I think you demoed it great, but one experience, right? To be able to move changes from code out to production, whether that's application code, database code, machine learning applications, infrastructure, right? So whatever pieces and parts are your application, it should be a common experience, right? And so if you learn how to do one of those things, you know how to do them all with Harness, which is great. You get the same sort of governance over all of it. It's fantastic. That allows you to deliver faster, right? With a better experience and have that confidence to release from your cell phone on the way home, right? Which is what we want. So that's what we got. And I think we can probably move into Q&A. So I think we've got a couple, and I'll encourage folks to drop questions to us as we go too. Let's see. I think Matt, you're smarter than me, so I'll ask you the questions. Let's see. We got one on rollback, which is always the fun one. So how does Harness handle the database rollback? Because that one's tricky.
Yeah. If my answer is restore from backup, that's wrong. So I'm not going to say that today. But yeah, so we support rollback. So today it's via version controlled chain logs and change sets, which you can see in the UI too. So the people that like to visually see the versions and everything. And then we use liquid-based open source under the cover to support those change log and change sets rollbacks. So what you can see in the UI or the audit log, so every DBA should love hearing this, right? So you can see the change that's tracked, approved, and tied to a specific deployment, which is key to see what your application new feature is doing. So you can tie that feature version to a database version, which then makes it easier just to revert that change back to the good state. Hey, this isn't working. I need to roll back. I don't want to think about all this stuff. And I don't want to call my application team to think about all their stuff. So let's just automate it all. So yeah, so our tool can help with all that. You still need some knowledge just on, tagging things with a version and, connecting the two pipelines. But from there, you got your template and you're golden.
Beautiful.
Right.
Okay. And then you mentioned that there was some Git support. Can you elaborate on that? Like how we manage our database changes like that?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So with Harness, right, like your database schema that you have and the change associated with that just lives in Git, right? And you can surface that in the Harness UI as well and edit it so you can see it and use it. But just like your application feature change lives in your code repo, your schema and your change associated with that lives in Git as well. So you can see it, you can review it, you can approve it. So how we end up seeing developers work with that, right, is they can clone change logs to just to kind of like model a template best behavior. They can write their SQL tests within Git as well, which is important, or steal the tests from a friend. You can also have different tests for different like environments, because as you know, environments often have different data. Like a production environment will likely have PII data in it or something, but a lower environment probably doesn't. So how you test that is going to have to change. But all that can like live in Git, so you can have that consistent test format and everything. So I could talk a little bit more about that, but I think that answers the question.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe you've answered this maybe. Yeah. So the question is, what if a change works in test, but it slows down my app in production? Is the answer there just run that rollback that we talked about earlier, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I mean, you can always roll back. Like Hardest preaches doing small iterative deployments, but sometimes with databases, the problem doesn't expose itself right away. And actually, like Hardest has partnered this year with a company called DB Marlin, which is like your database performance tool. And we actually did a different webinar with them a few months ago where we talked about this specific problem set. But basically, like during the deployment, like Harness can add like a change marker into like a database performance tool like DB Marlin into their timeline. So you can instantly see if the performance issue correlates with a specific DB change, right? So if you have a query that's running that all is significantly a lot longer or takes more memory, like you can see and compare the performance snapshots before and after, which helps you as a developer and DBA like kind of see what actually happened, right? So like we built in, that partnership to kind of like pair up with these tools. So you can like intelligently deliver your database change while also understanding performance metrics. Just because like any change, as you know, sometimes that incident reveals itself later on.
Yeah.
So with our testing pre-deployment and post-deployment, we're trying to capture and expose any of those gaps that exist.
So maybe it's tolerable and I keep it, but I get rapid feedback to the developers. They can then diagnose it quickly and then make their changes so that we can get a new fix out the door and we get our feedback before any real harm's done.
Yeah. And like you were saying too, Eric, earlier, just with progressive delivery, like hopefully we capture some of that stuff in lower environments before it moves all the way up through production, which is the goal. Because nothing is going to be perfect. Like we're trying to catch those issues earlier on, just so that the developer and DBA can collaborate quicker if there is going to be an issue.
All right, let's since we've time for about one more. Let's take this one. Yeah, for the developers, how does that help them move faster without getting yelled at? Which I think is always the goal, is to not take a beating, keep them safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we offer, you can say like guardrails, right? Not necessarily gates where the developer is having to stop, talk to somebody, wait, send an email, etc. So these guardrails that the product provides in collaboration with the expert from the DBA that's putting in their policies, it honestly enables the developer to like learn how to do it as well as follow that path that's going to make them do the right thing every time. So what that looks like, right, is policy as code. Like if you think about open policy agent, like leveraging your DBA's expertise into a policy. So for example, if a developer ever accidentally drops a table, right, can be a policy that says, hey, if I see this change set applying a drop table, I'm not going to let it go through anywhere. Or maybe I'll let it happen in a non-production environment, but not production, right? So there can be differences across environments for all that for the developer. Also, as a developer, so you don't get yelled at too, like the visibility in the UI across each environment as the database rolls out means that there's like fewer surprises for you, right? That you can collaborate with the DBA to do the right thing, which allows you to like focus on your application change, leverage, database DevOps to introduce the database schema change, and not have to worry that you're doing it wrong because in collaboration with the DBA at your company, you've implemented the right template and framework with enough flexibility to modify things as required. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think, Eric, that question that you bring up though, like it is scary working with databases because if you mess up a database, like it's serious consequences, fines, or even just like lost data that you have to try to get back from a backup tape too. So as a developer, right, like you need to be confident, and that's what we're delivering with Harness Database DevOps is, that confidence for you to follow and do the right thing every time, just so it doesn't slow you down.
Yeah. Go fast and don't break things.
Yeah. If that's it for questions, wanted to thank everybody for attending the webinar and listening to us. And if you wanted to learn more within the webinar, email that gets sent out or within the template of the webinar tool that you're logged into, you can click into getting a demo, booking a meeting with us, or just reading more about what this actually is and how it can help you. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having each of you, Eric, Matt. It's also been a pleasure having each of you. This topic was fantastic. Before we do close out, I want to remind everyone that this session was recorded. You will have a link sent to your inbox here shortly. You can watch the recording of this if you need to after today. There is a survey in the resource section. If you guys could take a moment and fill that out, your input is invaluable to us. It does go a long way with the Harness team. It helps us out here at TechStrong with what you want to hear on your next session. If you could let us know, that would be great. Once again, I hope you all have a great day. I hope you learned as much as I did, and we look forward to seeing you on the next TechStrong Learning webinar. Have a great day, everyone.